Hi, everybody. Welcome back on into Bufnagle, the podcast. I'm Zach. Today I'm joined by Rafe. Rafe, how are you?
Zach, I am fantastic. What a wonderful Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, it is Sunday we're recording this. We're recording this on the 13th of September. I'm in Minneapolis. Rafe, you're in Nashville this weekend, I
South
believe.
of, yep,
And
south
it's
of
the first
Nashville, and
weekend of football.
yes, it is first weekend of football. Unless you've been following some other, it's interesting. The high schools have been. Our local high school has played 3 or 4 games now, I think, and Philip has one game in the books after this weekend, and it's a great day here in Nolensville, Tennessee.
There we go. That's great to hear. So just a reminder for all our listeners, thank you for tuning on in. If you ever need to find us or contact us, you can email us at buffnagle@buffnagle.com. We have a Twitter feed and we're working on that Instagram page as well. So be on the lookout for those type of things in the future. But yeah, we got a great show today. We only got two topics. We got a bunch of listener questions. We're gonna have a lot of fun. Rafe, you any good stories from this last week you want to share before we get started?
So at this point, I'm going to dive into the first topic. Includes some It's driven by some stories, and we're going to be
Okay.
talking about time zones, which is
All right.
I
Yeah.
find it.
I mean, yeah. So, Rafe, I would like to say probably once a month you text me about something with someone referring to Central Time as Central Standard Time or Central Daylight's Time. I have no idea what the difference between the two is. Fun fact: I just go whatever the clock says and I show up at that time. But you're a lot more nuanced about it. So, how about you get started and explain some history on us?
Yeah, that's thanks, Zach. That's a you're right. I rail and rant on time zone stuff very often, and basically because it causes confusion, and it doesn't have to. I think. Let me do a little time zoney history and where we are now, and a little bit of advice on the way to do time zones when you're sending email to your colleagues around the world. Um, Recently, I had a friend contact me, and he said that he was setting up interviews with people. He's in the Central Time Zone in Chicago, and he was doing interviews with people who are actually in the EU in Europe. And the administrative assistant that works with him had scheduled some interviews and told people that the interview would be at sometime 10 o'clock Central Standard Time. So the people signed in at 10 o'clock Central Standard Time, and they were exactly 1 hour late because although they were on Central Standard Time, or they were following Central Standard Time in Europe, the guy in Chicago in summertime, he was on Central Daylight Time. So these things matter, and they impact all sorts of things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Um, the first thing to realize, and I was reading a
So
book on,
so
but
before
yeah,
you get going here, you mentioned he scheduled the interviews for standard time when in fact he was on daylight times. So were the people actually in fact late?
the people were did exactly as they were instructed, right? And
So
the
so
thing is,
it's not their fault.
it's really not their fault. You're right. It was the fault. Unfortunately, it was the fault of the administrative assistant, who was, I guess the right word is cavalier with with the use of the terminology Central Standard Time. Um, Central Standard Time has a precise meaning. It doesn't mean what most of the people are doing right now in the Midwest. That's not what Central Standard Time means. Eastern Standard Time doesn't mean what's typically going on here in the East Coast. Okay. Pacific Standard Time is not what's mostly happening in Los Angeles. It has a specific meaning, right? And in order to get there, you have to understand a couple things about how the planet goes around the sun, right? And how fast it does that, and
Very
what a day.
fast. I know
Yes,
that.
it goes faster than I can run. Um, so the first thing to realize is before the invention of the steam locomotive, pretty much nothing on the planet traveled faster than a horse. The fastest you could go was a horse. Now, granted, I guess there were some falcons that were diving very rapid
Well, I'm pretty
races.
sure cheetah is faster than a horse, but you can't really
Right,
ride a
and
cheetah.
on occasion, a cheetah would be faster than a horse, but any sort of distance travel um, was the fastest you could go was a horse. And what happened is people had local what was called local time. All right, the guy in town who owned the watch and set the clock in the tower, this guy, he was the only guy who probably went to college, and he set the clock. And when the bells rang in the morning to say your prayers, they rang at noon to say your prayers, they rang at night to say your prayers, and that's how your day went. And occasionally, if you had to go on horseback to somewhere else, by the time you got there, you couldn't go far enough, fast enough for it to make any difference if you were on local time, local solar time in one place or the other. Okay, now when people started going faster and farther, longitude mattered. Okay, the issue is that when the sun comes up in Chicago, it's already been up for several hours in London, and if you're going to start talking across those lines, then that matters. Okay, each degree of longitude across the planet is about 4 minutes of time. Right? So if you are,
Oh,
say, 10 degrees farther west than I am, that's going to be about or it's going to take 40 minutes for the sun to get there. All right. So your local time will be behind my local time. Okay. So turns out when the trains started going, they started going pretty fast. They were doing 50, 60 miles an hour. That was very fast relative to the other people. And if you leave, it sounds like an algebra problem. You leave New York at a certain time, you arrive in Philadelphia at a certain time, and then you get to Chicago. What time is it when you get there? And the answer is, well, it depends on whose watch you're looking at. Right? So the railways came up
so
with
it's a joke.
railroad
So math is a joke, is what I'm hearing.
math, all those things are riddles, and they just require you to figure out how to solve them. All right. Each railroad had its own railroad time. All right, and that was based upon the time at the main station. It got pretty complicated. Okay, and to make it even more complicated, if you tried to measure it relative to a prime meridian, all right, because has to do with longitude. Every country had its own meridian that it thought was important. Okay, so like in France, they drew a meridian through Paris. In Germany, they had one going through Berlin. In Italy, went through Rome. In the
Well,
U.S., we have
but Paris is the center of the world, so that makes,
it
that's
is this,
logical.
and this is a there's an interesting story on this. I have a map here hanging right above, well, right outside my desk here, and it represents longitude both relative to Greenwich, England, and relative to Washington D.C. On one axis it says degrees longitude west of Washington, and the other one says degrees longitude west of Greenwich. And it's interesting because people figured out when people started going really really fast and sending signals long distances through these wires that they dropped across the Atlantic. People wanted to know what time is it. Okay, so the idea was to come up with a prime meridian where we would define the time. And long story short is that ended up being in Greenwich, England. And I had to look this one up today. I wasn't sure how to pronounce Greenwich. Okay? It's not Greenwich. It's either Greenwich or Greenwich. Greenwich or Greenwich. Right? There's lots of different ways to say it, but don't say Greenwich. Okay. So
Greenway.
what happens is the countries got together and they said we're going to have a prime meridian. It's going to go through Greenwich, and that's another story for another day. And what we're going to do is we're going to find there's going to be a time there. It's going to be Greenwich Mean Time is what they started off with, GMT. Some people still use the term GMT, although that's subtly different than what is the current standard, which is UTC, which is Coordinated Universal Time. And it's Coordinated Universal Time, but it's not CUT. It's UTC, which has to do with like saying it in French or
Yeah.
something. Okay,
Of course,
so
it's always about the French. That's what it comes back
you
to.
know what? It is interesting that in the Olympics we say things in you announce the winners in English and then you announce it in French because it's French. It sounds nice, all right. That you got to give the French credit for that. Um, it is beautiful to hear, and if you want to talk French, we'll do the podcast sometime in French, Zach, and see how that goes.
Tournée
All
à
right, so
droite. I got it. Nailed it. Turn right.
yeah, you guys don't know this. Zach programmed his GPS in his car to speak in French, and the only thing we know is tourner à droite and
Tournée à droite. I know how to go left and right.
tourner la gauche, la gauche, la gauche. It's
I
left,
don't speak
right?
French.
Anyway, so we won't do the podcast in French. So the idea is that's called Zulu time. That's zero time. All right. Every time zone is an area of land that measures its time relative to what's happening at Greenwich, okay, which is Zulu time or Z or zero. Okay, so that's where that comes from. Okay, so for example, Eastern Standard Time is 5 hours behind UTC. So sometimes they will write UTC minus five. Right, so that means whatever time it is in Greenwich, Eastern Standard Time is 5 hours behind that. So if it's noon in Greenwich, it's 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Okay,
But what about
Central.
daylight savings time?
Well, we'll get there. Okay, so Central Time is 6 hours, Mountain Time is 7 hours, and Pacific Time is 8 hours. But in the summer, people figured out that people will go spend more money on things like ice cream after dinner if the sun is still up for a while. So in the summer, we go to a thing called daylight saving time, or sometimes daylight savings time, sometimes summertime. Right, but what we do is we move our clocks 1 hour ahead. So in Eastern Time Zone, move from Eastern Standard Time to Eastern Daylight Time. They go from 5 hours behind UTC to 4 hours behind UTC. Central goes from 6 to 5. Mountain goes from 7 to 6, and Pacific goes from 8 to 7. So what you notice immediately then is if you are on Central Daylight Time, that's identical to Eastern Standard Time because they're both 5 hours off of UTC.
Yep.
And this gets all really confusing because people are like,
So,
well, just,
so
yeah,
in other words, we've created this thing where we have to do more work by having um, a different um, not
offset.
connotation, a different
Which,
thing that you add on the end when we don't really need it. When we just need Central Time, and if you're in Eastern Time and someone says Central Time, you just add an hour,
so generally what we should talk about when you're talking
right?
to your friend, and yeah, if you're not certain if you're on standard or on daylight or which one you're doing,
I'm not.
just leave that out. Okay, say
Yep.
Central or say Eastern Time or say Pacific Time or say the time where you are. Whatever it is, okay? And then do that. If
Yep.
you specify daylight or you specify standard and you didn't mean to, then that's where the problems come in. And what happened is the administrative assistant for my friend specified Central Standard Time. And those poor guys over there in Europe were like, okay, Central Standard, they looked it up on the chart, is 6 hours off from UTC. I'm on Central European summertime or whatever it was. So therefore I'm 2 hours ahead. So it's going to be 8 hour shift. And they did that and they did it right. Right. But the admin specified the wrong thing. So what she should have said is she should have said it will be at whatever time, Central Time. Just leave the standard and the daylight thing out, and then people can ask and make the adjustments as they need it. So the important thing to recognize, if you know for sure if you're on daylight or standard, if you want to do that, great. Otherwise, just leave the middle digit out and call it Eastern Time or Pacific Time or Mountain Time or Central Time, and let the computers take care of that stuff for you. That's I assume Zach, that's
That's
what
why
you
we have computers.
that's one reason is computers should make your life easier. So remember, the word standard doesn't mean that's what everybody's doing. Standard means that's what we are doing unless we go to daylight. Now,
Yep.
some places like Arizona, they don't go to daylight time. Okay, they are on Mountain Standard year round. Right. So then when Pacific goes an hour early, Pacific lines up with Arizona in the summer. Denver lines up with Arizona in the winter. Right? Because Arizona doesn't go to daylight time. So we can, we could spend hours talking about time if you'd
Okay,
like. There's a
good.
number of great stories about. I do want to come back sometime, Zach, about why the prime meridian is in Greenwich and why it's not in
Oh,
Paris.
I know you would.
But I'm gonna skip that for right now because I think we're gonna do another thing. Anyway,
Well,
you
I
got
think
questions? And send us a note.
yeah, I think well, moving on past from time, which is its own thing, onto food, which is significantly more fun, and the age-old question of is cheesecake a cake or a pie? We discussed this. I'm pretty sure I send this in a group text about once a month. Usually, when you send the thing about time, I send the thing about cheesecake, just to keep it significantly more fun. But the way we classify food is the way same way we could classify animals and species, and the taxonomy of um, animals
So
can be
the
treated
word
the same way.
was tax. The word is taxonomy.
Yeah, that's what I
Taxonomy.
said.
Oh, you said taxonomy.
Yeah, I've heard it both
Taxonomy.
ways. Um,
Okay,
but
so there is a
cheesecake.
tax. You're going to reveal a taxonomy of food that you found. Is that's
Yeah.
where we're going?
So, floating through the internet, because the internet is great and wonderful, is this thing called the cube rule of food. You can Google this and read about it yourself. But the underlying principle is you identify dishes, foods, salads, soups, bread bowls, stuff like that by the
Starch.
by the starch location of the food. So the bread, the crust of a cake or a pie, the
The
bread
bun.
bowl of a bread bowl for salads. The way that sushi is folded with the rice or the seaweed or anything, all of those things together. Or if there is no starch, you get the simple answer of salad, which means that ice
Wait,
cream is a
salad. Wait. Let
therefore
me go
we're
back. Make
healthy.
sure I got. I got to make sure I know this. So what I'm going to do is you give me a food. I
Yeah.
give you a food, and you look at the location of how the starch is integrated into the final presentation of the food.
Yeah.
Right?
So we'll start simple. And we'll go
Okay.
with
Just
peanut butter toast.
peanut butter toast. So I have bread that has been
Yep.
toasted, and I put
Yep.
peanut butter on the top of it.
Yep.
Okay. So, and that is considered what?
That's just standard toast. There are
Right. And
also
toast is any, so toast is anything that has starch
your
on the bottom.
starch on the bottom. So a pizza, a flat New York style pizza where you have your crust flat and then you have your cheese and your sauce and your toppings on that next layer up, very similar to how you have peanut butter toast, is also a toast. So therefore, you
So
can have pizza
flatbread
for breakfast
flatbread
and that's your toast.
flatbread pizza is essentially toast in
Yep.
this category.
Yep.
So if you look this up on the interweb, you'll see that it has a cube, all right, and then the cube has different scenes or faces of it
Yeah.
shaded, right? So if the bottom face of the cube is shaded,
Yep.
that's toast because the starch is on the bottom.
Yep.
And so if I put starch on the bottom and starch on the top,
Oh, I think that's a sandwich.
that would be okay. That would be so anything starch on the bottom, starch on the top. Does it have to be the same starch, or it's just like any starch?
I think we can go any starch.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and then there's always the interesting debate we have of, is the hot dog a sandwich or not a
Okay.
sandwich? The hot dog
Okay. So
is an American taco.
okay, yeah. So in the picture, if it has the bottom face and both side faces are starch, the front and the back and the top are open or not
Yep.
starch, then it's a taco. So so obviously hot dog is a taco in this taxonomy. Right?
Yep.
And then if I do the same thing, but I cover the top with starch, so I got starch on the top and the bottom and the sides, but not the front and the back.
Yeah, there's kind
That's
of like a
sushi.
hole in the middle. That's sushi. And Americans are really good at taking other people's food and Americanizing it. And a pig in a blanket is American sushi.
Right, right. And so today on my way to the hardware store, I stopped and I got I think it's called a tornado. It's at twice daily. It's a tornado. It's a
Oh,
whirlwind of flavor. But essentially it's a starch rolled up around some other stuff. I actually got the cheese and pepperoni tornado, which is kind of like a pizza,
nice.
but it's rolled up like the sushi, so that makes it a sushi. So
All
let me
right.
go back to hear this pizza idea. So I know our friends like okay, so a flatbread pizza is obviously toast, but
Yep.
if I make a deep dish pizza, I have starch on the bottom and all of the sides. I think that's called a quiche, isn't it?
I think that is a quiche.
All right, so
I
regular
also,
pizza is toast, right? And
yep.
all right, and then deep dish pizza is quiche. What about that Chicago pizza?
I think Chicago pizza is a deep dish pizza.
Okay. It
Then
also has
it
crust on the
a
top.
quiche. It
I
does
know,
not
but it
have
has crust on. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what they
oh,
do. They put crust on the bottom and the top and all the way around. Oh, according to the picture, that's a calzone.
oh, no, no, okay. That is a yeah, but they don't put a layer of crust on the top of a deep dish pizza.
I think that's what they do in
I
Chicago.
think we think Chicago deep dish pizza, and we are thinking of different things.
Oh, all right. Well, you there goes the interweb right there. The Google
Yeah, I mean,
says
I think this is its own type of I mean, this Google image I have right here looks like it's a quiche.
I
I
will
mean,
give
but
you
if
that.
you would put another, um, thing over the top there, we got a calzone and, we're just, hanging out. But you
Okay,
know
I
what?
got
Also going back to that quiche, I think, we got the cheesecake family might be like, "You know what? We're a quiche. We don't need your pie. We don't need your cake. We're a quiche." They're their own thing.
wait. So let me hit that a second. So pie then, because it has the crust on the bottom and on the top and on the sides, then the
Yep.
pie is actually a calzone. Apple pie is a calzone, but like if you
Yeah.
make pumpkin pie is a quiche.
Yeah. Or if you make I know you can make cheesecakes with only that flat level of that singular toast level, and then you have your cheesecake as toast.
Okay, so I got to
So
ask this question.
cheesecake is like everything.
Cheesecake can be is well, see, it's kind of like it's like the platypus of food, right? I mean, you're not sure it should be a mammal, but it lays eggs, and it's complicated there. Okay, let me ask you this question: if I take like we used to have this stuff when I was a kid in high school, and it was like mashed potatoes with turkey chunks and gravy, all right, and it was served in a bowl. So that's obviously toast because the starch is on the bottom and the stuff is on the top. But if I take that and I stir it up into like a glob of stuff and the
Yep.
starch is intermixed, see, that's not on here, okay? The cube rule of food identification doesn't identify it if it's all mixed in, if the starch is integrated as a whole with the other thing. Is that a are we outside of this
I
taxonomy
think
here? Or
the taxonomy then breaks down and degenerates into something else. Or we don't know what it is, so we're just gonna call it a salad and we'll deal with it later. And you can say that you're healthy by having a salad.
if I just have a steak tonight with no starch, that's a salad.
Yeah, and or if you even have starch and the starch isn't underneath your steak, that's a salad. Or when we're done recording this and I go over and I get some ice cream, you know what I'm having? A
Having
salad.
a salad. Yeah, yeah, it's a salad. All right, I got you, Zach.
Yeah.
I
But
got
I can talk about me being healthy and eating salads all day long,
I
but I
got you.
can't. We got a great listener question this week, Rafe.
Yep.
You applied to NASA,
I did apply to NASA. Some people
and
know that story.
you know why
Yep.
are you not up at the International Space Station right now?
I have to say that it's an interesting question because when I was in college, actually, I contemplated this idea of how do I become an astronaut, and because who doesn't want to be an astronaut? And it's one thing to think it and drink Tang. It's another thing to try to figure out how to get into the queue. And it's actually reasonably difficult to actually to get to even get evaluated. What you have to do is you have to have a fancy degree in a sciencey kind of thing, and then you have to like be I don't you have to like know stuff and you have to be in fairly good physical condition and
That's you.
oh, well, see, it is me, and I saw that recently. I think it was 2016, 2017, maybe 2018. And what I did is I filled out the application, and the application is highly onerous. You have to first of all, it's a U.S. government application, so you have to set up you apply online as you would for any government job, which is really kind of funny. So I had to set up an account with the Department of whatever NASA's in, and make an
Space.
account. Yeah, the Space Department, and so I filled it out, and you have to send in your transcripts to find my transcripts from college and from grad school and get them all in the proper format and send them in. And what's interesting to me is I actually, a lot of people apply. Not everybody applies correctly, right? And a lot of people get bounced out early because the process online is not obvious on how to do it. And but I will have you know, although I did not get chosen to be an astronaut candidate, I was actually considered, right? Which means that my application was reviewed by somebody before they said, "No way are we taking this guy."
That-
So it's one thing to apply, it's another thing to apply correctly. So I got past the hurdle of actually applying correctly, and then a while later, I got the rejection notice. And then about a year later or 2 years later, I got an email from the USA Jobs thing that was like, "Hey, your portal hasn't had any action in a year or 2. Do you wanna keep it open?" And I was like, "You know what? That time has flown."
all
But
right.
I do taunt Zach. I taunt your brother about this regularly, and because he would like to be Johnny NASA boy, but he's a
Johnny Space
talented
Commander.
guy. Yeah, he would be a better space commander than I am. But hey, got to fill out the application. So that's the answer to the listener question. That was my
All
NASA
right.
story, and
Well, we have plenty
yeah,
more listener questions we can get to at later weeks, but that's going to be it for today. Thank you all for tuning in. If you need to reach us, like we said earlier, bufnagle@bufnagle.com, or you can always find us on the Twitter machine at bufnagle. Ray, if you got any other news you want to share?
no real news. I just want to thank everybody for listening in. We would uh, we are shills for cash. So if you have a, small business you would like us to promote, you give us some ad copy and we'll read it as long as it's not immoral or illegal. Then we'll do it. So send us your information. We'll be in touch. You can actually talk to us live on that phone thing, and we'll discuss it. So, otherwise, hey, have a great Buff Nagel day, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys. See you soon.